Hello everyone. It's very great, my pleasure to be here and share my knowledge, experience, and share the information about our organization, which we are very proud on what we do and what we think, how we think, and where we go. So Human Rights Matter was established in 2013. There were only 2 people there who had the NGO background, and that one of them, it was me, and another person was Linda Aguilar. She is now currently the executive director. She is not today with us. She is on parental leave. And she is from Chicago, and I'm originally from Tajikistan, from the north part, Khujand. And interestingly, we found each other in Berlin. And we became very good friends, and we found out that our values are so similar, are so common, and we decided, okay, we want to do something together, because we thought, like, we know how long our life, but how long is it? We would like to make the impact to the world. So Human Rights Matter is an organization who believes that collectively, all together, we can make some changes, no matter in which kind of part of the world. It doesn't matter what kind of nationality I have or our members have. Wherever the problem is, we would like to go and help, because we are all people. We not introduce ourselves with nationality. I'm Tajik, or my colleague, my colleague, he's from Ethiopia. So, but we introduce with our values. So that's why we decided, okay, we ground it, we make it the group of people who believe the same, who has the same values, and enthusiastic. We started with 2 people, and now we're 7 people. We are very international. As I said, I'm from Tajikistan. Linda, she's from Chicago. She's US. Shimels from Ethiopia. We have members from Ukraine. We have members from Germany, also from Sri Lanka. And we have a lot of interns. We are very proud about them. We already had about like 15 interns with us. They come for 3 months up to until like 6 months maximum. So we have 4 programs currently. The first program is a Human Rights Defenders program. The second was a Human Rights and Armed Forces. And third is LGBTQI community. And the fourth is an anti-torture program. We mostly actively work on 2 programs. It's a Human Rights and Armed Forces and Human Rights Defenders Protection Program. On Human Rights Defenders, we work globally. And with Human Rights and Armed Forces, we are now working on Central Asia. And we use different kind of methods of our work. So usually what kind of questions we have from interns, or people who just introduce, they say, I'm from Human Rights Matter, and they say, how do you do your work? The first question I always get, how do you find victims? How do you contact them? Sitting in Berlin, in a kind of like very wealthy country, where human rights, it's not maybe the biggest like problem. How you get contact, like say in the Philippines, where we work with the human rights defenders there, or how you contact the people in Central Asia, or post-Soviet Union countries, or African continent. The thing is that we all have connections. We make a lot of contacts. It's a network of human rights defenders. It's a network of activists. It's a people who want to make the social changes. So it's also our background. We have an experience. We have contacts. So we get some emails where we say, okay, we have a problem. Could you please help us with this? So we work on the international level. We write complaints to the UN. We have the human rights mechanism there. It's a human rights committee. We write the communication. We wrote communication on behalf of the 4 human rights defenders already on the working group on arbitrary detention. We make lobbying in UPR. Our former presenter said Universal Periodic Review, which goes every 5th year. We work on the national level as well, though we're sitting in Berlin. We make the analysis of legislation in compliance with international human rights standards. So we do the advocacy campaigns. We work a lot with, now it's like technological era. We use the infographics, we use different kind of creative means to raise the awareness of Europeans and other parts of the world about that we have human rights activists in Central Asia and then the Latin America and everywhere, and then we introduce them together. So we also make the advocacy campaigns on, let's say, like to write the petition. The best thing with Berlin is you have so good connection to diplomatic missions here. In the UPR, that was a perfect. We met with like 20 embassies here and we promote the recommendation there. So the best also good is a geographical location of Berlin in the European to go to the Geneva, which is very expensive city, but it's very cheap tickets to go there. So it's also like I think this is a big advantage to be in Berlin and to open the NGO and to do activism here. So yes, we with the human rights and armed forces, I will give a very brief overview why we work on the human rights and armed forces, because it's also and then Shimels could give you the information about the challenges on human rights defenders. Who are those human rights defenders? Why we work on the human rights defenders? When we talk about human rights and armed forces, most of the people look at the armed forces as a perpetrators, as a people who violates international humanitarian law or the human rights during conflicts or even the peacetime. Our organization works with the protection of armed forces personnel. From what? The thing is that there are not a lot of documents, international documents, which protect the rights of the armed forces personnel, but there is one which exists. I believe, do you know the Organization for Security and Cooperation for Europe? Which is located in Vienna, the offices, ODHR, who are working on democratic institutions and human rights. There is a document, the Code of Conduct on Political Military Aspects for Security. And this is a codified document which says that the armed forces personnel rights have to be protected. What we witness working on this, the armed forces personnel in the military units, they are subjected to hazing, humiliation, harassment, and many kind of violations happening with that. Just a brief example of Tajik army, what's happening there. There's a lot of soldiers new soldiers who go to serve for 1 year, they become the subjects of the torture and inhuman treatment. And recently the court of Tajikistan made the decision of the rehabilitation, 200 euro for the rehabilitation, which is even not 1% of the whole expenses. So what we do, what we found even the UPR session in the Geneva, that none of the countries in the world, their diplomatic mission, have any interest on the protection of the rights of armed forces personnel. This is kind of political taboo. They don't want to touch military at all. As soon as you touch, they started. So the only country in UPR session, it was Germany, who talked about their torture in armed forces personnel. So that's why we believe that if we want our military to protect us, we have to protect them first and to show that human rights are valid, that human rights are respected. So that's why we have to start. It's kind of like when you start to teach people in the school, we have to teach respecting human rights in the armed forces. So that's why we are now going from Tajikistan and Central Asia to Russian Federation. You know that the Russia has a lot of also problem with the military, all those violations which happen in the Ukraine territory. So, we kind of very passionate about the conducting analytical work on this and to see how we can use the code of conduct effectively in those countries. So this kind of challenges, the big challenge is a lack of political will of countries, of the members of OSCE, of the members of UN, to talk and do something with the human rights of armed forces personnel. So that's why we are facing very big problems with this. But we try also to involve many other countries, many human rights organizations in this work, because alone you will not be able to make any changes. So, and I think that Shimels could shed a light to the situation with the Human Rights Defenders program and the challenges we face.
Yeah, thank you very much, Farah, and I'm also grateful to the Institute for inviting us to be here and share what we are doing on behalf of the human rights matter. And before delving into the substantial aspects of the challenge that human rights defenders are experiencing these days, it might be also interesting how I found myself being a member to this group. It was back in 2014 when I came here as a PhD student that I found out that there is a group who are not as such interested about where you come from or what kind of background you have, but as long as you have the value that are universal and intercultural or interdisciplinary, so that we can bring all what we have together and we can give it back. Since then, I have been part of the works that Human Rights Matter is actively trying to contribute. I will talk a little bit about the existing challenges of human rights defenders. For us, when we are in a safe place, we don't really feel the actual pain that those who are in the field are suffering. But at least we can contribute in a way of bringing it on board, or we have the better opportunity to make their voices heard at the international place. So we just serve as a springboard, as a transitory body, that we collect all the raw data and informations about the actual violations at some place where they don't have a direct access to this international human rights monitoring body, so that we make them more legally sensible, and we try to submit these communications and alarming or some urgent actions to be taken on behalf of these regional and universal human rights organizations. Coming to the actual challenge that these human rights defenders and activists are actually facing on the field, it might take us somehow to the recent past history of the evolution of human rights that we have. As you might all know, just in the aftermath of the Cold War, the motto behind the Western countries was just a work on democratization, human rights, and rule of law as a founding basis for any dialogue with authoritarian regimes. But especially after the 9/11, after this talk of terrorism became a common agenda for all democrats, authoritarians, then we have to go this without saying that the diplomatic and developmental moral ground of the West is increasingly deteriorating. So are we really at the stage, being a West, to officially denounce or criticize what's going on the other side of the world? So this issue of moral crisis that we are honestly experiencing in this part of the world is contributing as a signal of legitimizing what authoritarian regimes are doing on the other part. So it's a sense of making this known and accepting it and admitting it. Secondly, authoritarian regimes does not seem anymore absolutely dependent on development aids from the West, so that they can freely say no. So the issue of this lobbying and naming and shaming on the basis of human rights values, democratization, and rule of law is becoming a second agenda, a second topic. So what actually these human rights defenders are facing on the ground takes me to the second point which I want to address. That is, nowadays we have this tendency of blurring and merging all the activities of human rights defenders, human rights activists, participation in opposition politics as synonyms to what we call it the most famous topic of our contemporary world, terrorism. So on one hand, their scope of actual involvement is tightened by domestic laws and regulations, so that we will find now plenty of legislations that restrict participation of any civil society organization in more of those traditionally non-civil and political rights, like advocacy on freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, and all other political participations as a citizenship. They don't work on this kind of awareness creation programs, only as a role to give service, not to influence in policy making and other well-known and more influential missions. Secondly, the funding aspect. Now, based on the international and the domestic work on the fight against terrorism, the financial resources of these organizations are being tightened and restricted, so that they are not anymore capable of interacting with international organizations who can financially contribute to make their work more functional. And they are expected to raise every source of their income only from the local source, which is unrealistic, so that they are financially and materially tightened. The third and the most sensitive aspect, even if they try to pass all these hurdles and work on the actual challenges of the people who are in need of their voice, they are being charged of some trumped up charges, false accusations, and some other related threats to their life, to their family, so that they are not as such as protected as they deserve to be, even if they may contribute their own resource, even if they may do whatever it takes to bring the voices of all the others heard. So they are not as such protected from these aspects. Accordingly, the work of human rights defenders nowadays is being equated as ordinary criminals at some parts of the world. It's becoming a sense of delegitimizing their work. It's becoming a common ground of somehow naming them and shaming them and being marginalized from the mass at all. So all this kind of administrative, financial, and at times threats to their personal, family, and societal lives are contributing to the ultimate objective that everybody would expect it to happen back in the days. So from this, the experience that we gathered from the people we are in contact with, we have found these major problems as major obstacles for human rights defenders to influence and contribute at domestic affairs. Yeah. I think these are the main things which I want to contribute.
I would just, probably add to these, like what the human rights organizations do with all of these things. I can say that it's really, really sometimes difficult to be in this field, because we are working, not only we sit and we write the petition. In order to write the petition, you need so many resources, sometimes which is very undermined. It's a management of the organization, the management of the people. Even now, I'm just standing here and I'm thinking, if I got your interest, if you have an interest to make the input there, a little bit of your time, 1 hour per week, just to sit and think. You get the petition from change.org or Avas who do the petition. We see that horrible thing, but sometimes, as Shimels said, it's really difficult to feel what the people there feel. It's just impossible sometimes. And every day in this era, we open the Facebook and it's many, many problems. And you want to be in all those problems. You want to solve all those problems because you feel kind of, you feel sorry for that situation and you fight. And what Shimels said about the, for example, legislation, what's happening in the Russian Federation, it's very, very famous now. It's about the foreign agents. as a human rights activist, I have to put this foreign agent, or to put the cap to write I'm foreign agent, because whatever I do in Russia, I have to write that I'm foreign agent. Honestly, sometimes you feel in your own country as a foreign person, that it's not your country anymore, you cannot control anything, everything goes. And the thing is with legislation, it's a very big thing, because legislation goes to parliament, and the question how to change the legislation which was ordered by the government to the parliament to adopt. So it's very extremely difficult. So as soon as it's adopted, it's impossible in many, many countries. So I think like what we're trying to do from like in our team, like to try to help. We will never be movement. We are part of the movement. Every who is sitting here, I kind of trying to maybe inspire you, maybe also to think about the human rights. Because honestly, I just recently, this morning, met with a human rights activist. She said that in my country now, when you say human rights, it's already not fashionable. It's just, yeah, okay, whatever. Human rights, it's not anymore in the agenda of the government. They're sick of it. They only think like, they think, okay, human rights, it's not as like 10 years ago, transition period from the falling the Iron Curtain. That was, wow, it's a human rights, a lot of aids, and now the government just like they're just deaf, blind, they don't want to hear about it. And I think it's a time when all we together should be creative and think, okay, how we could approach the human rights, democracy, rule of law. So that's why, yes, we try to be creative, we try to communicate and understand people and to do some changes. And I believe sometimes you think it's impossible to do changes. It is possible. And it's never, we have to never think that you as an individual can change. No, never. As we definitely change. And I've seen many, many changes, and I'm very proud of the people who did this. So, yeah, I hope you all will be also inspired and make one of the drop to that big ocean. So, thank you for your attention. If you have questions, we are...
Yeah, very much.
Thank you very much for all the important information. Do we have some questions for our two speakers? Okay, we're going to start in the back and we'll work this way. Can you please stand up, give your name and your country?
Yeah.
Generally getting people interested, especially when things happening far away, or if the only people who share experiences is English, German, or any language,
It's very, very interesting question, honestly, because sometimes language is very undermined. We have so much information in English, let's say in German, Spanish, because many people speak, and the language becomes very challenging, indeed. And honestly, when we are working on different kind of campaigns, I will bring just from the practice. Like recently, the Tajik Coalition Against Torture, they started to they launched a campaign about that at least people in Tajikistan should know about the human rights offenders. And they did the kind of actions, they put the person and why this person decided to be human rights offenders. And it was available in Tajik and Russian language. So it was mostly for Tajikistan and post-Soviet Union countries. But then one of our interns, she said, I would like to know what they said. and she is from Latin America. And I said, okay, I will translate into English, you will translate into Spanish. But honestly, it takes a lot of time. It's a lot of research. It's very difficult, but it happens. And I agree that the many things should be language-wise accessible. Even now, we have some of the action we would like to bring human rights defenders at risk to Germany for them to participate in certificate program here, which is master level certificate program, but it's in English. So it means so many people, they leave without no access to information. And the language, this undermines that access. So what about to get the interest difficult? Very difficult to get the interest. Because when you say human rights, it's kind of you understood everything, but you didn't understand. Because it's like this, yeah. When you say I'm working on human rights, wow, oh, okay. And then this conceptual thing of human rights, it's quite difficult, honestly. For me, it took a long time. I have the legal background, but for me, it took a long time and still takes a long time to understand, first of all, what is human rights? I have to take into account historical background of the country, cultural, traditional, many aspects. You cannot just go with universal declaration and say, okay, you have to do this, but you have to transform it, considering not only country, because as for example, Sri Lanka, it's Tamil too, it's group, it's different kind of nationalities there. And it's not just easy to go and say, okay, this is human rights. And then the country say, oh guys, it's a Western values. You don't need this. Let's do it. So I would say, what do we do to bring the interest of the people to our program or to this movement? One of the very good experience we had the intern from Russian Federation, and she didn't have any knowledge of human rights. But after 4 months of the internship said, I want to be human rights defenders. I just all the time proud of this story about us. But I think it's everyone. We have to pass the knowledge. We have to pass the experience to everyone. So they get even one person you will. Don't think about the billions of 7 billion people. Just think about one person. If you got the interest of that person, it's already great because that person can save 10 lives. It's also or 20 or 100. So.
Yeah, I think the key is just use the network that you have already. It doesn't matter whether 1 or 2 or more. This network is extremely important in order to address the local people and their needs out there. And secondly, let's not try to pretend as if we are just pure professionals. I mean, she is the director, but she serves as a translator in matters that we don't understand. And the same the other members do. And look at the resource that you have already, then I'm quite sure it's going to be extended to the others too. That's how we started it. When we were 7, almost 7 of us were from different countries. So when we have something to deal with in German, then we would send our German member to address all these administrative issues. When we have an actual problem back in Philippines, we would use the member that we have from the Philippines. So all these kind of things will work as long as the interest, the passion, and the motive is there.
Yep.
Yeah.
Just like to mention, networking is a theme that's been coming up a lot in our classes here at the ICD lately. I see a lot more hands, which is great. So let's take this opportunity to get a dialogue going. Oh yes, could you please stand up and say your name, where you're from?
Hi, my name is Andrej, and I'm from India also.
Yeah. They're next to you, yeah.
But the question, I think you already mentioned pretty much your board material, including her question actually. I still just have one question. You know, when we talk about human rights, like what kind of challenges and that you face, starting from the political way and the threats and also from the terrorism or maybe from the family itself, for example, because I haven't studied much about human rights. So for me, for example, I was talking to my father the other day that, it is quite interesting because since 2 days we have been having some sessions. So my father would say, okay, he's an engineer, not in politics. So he would say, no, you don't have to go for human rights, there could be a lot of threats or threatening things and stuff like that. So, I mean, starting from the scratch, like, you know, how have you developed so much that you still can go on this path, you know? So, that's my question. Thank you.
Yeah, I have had the same experience, like people telling me that exposing yourself to this kind of activities is like playing with a fire, you know, because you are confronting authorities who are much, much powerful than you. So, but if it's inside, not a family pressure, not friends pressure, or even the external pressure, threats that you might have to receive, starting from the local authorities to the bigger bosses. All these kind of things may not affect your decision if it's but most of us, when we find ourselves in a certain situation, we become too emotional, and it comes out and it collapses all of a sudden when we start to have this kind of challenge. But if it is from inside, if it is who you are, then I don't think all this kind of challenge. It's not fun, of course, it's not something luxurious, but for us, at least at the very moment, we are the most protected people because we live here in Belete. But every day when you think of the actual challenge that the people who work there on the ground are facing, it's hard to sleep. For us, it's just to organize what they send as the message and then release it. But that doesn't give you the relief. You feel always the pain because you just put yourself on their foot and you think, what would I have done if I were, you know, on their place. So let's try to sensitize it. Then let's see if it is from inside or if it's because we were under the pressure of something that was totally external.
I see another question here. Stand up and give your name.
Thank you for the presentation. My name is Robin. I'm from France. I'd like to come a little bit about what you said about the state's interest about it. It's true that nowadays it's something that goes with license than before, and now I guess that terrorism and environmental troubles are much more on the mainland. How could you explain that change? Is it because the state understood it as a too big task for them, or is it because it's just not fashionable? And then is there a role of the media to realize it more or not?
Thank you. Yeah. About the fashion or other thing. The thing is that human rights agenda actually it threats to the authoritarian regimes. Definitely. Why? When you come up with a human rights ban, it will limit their power, monopoly, their control. If we go to authoritarian regimes, they're very different kind of authoritarian regimes. Either they control all the business sector or they control all natural resources. It depends on the country, definitely. The thing is that from what we experience, what we see now is that it's allies of the authoritarian regimes too, who support which big powers. Who are big powers? It's US, it's Russia, it's China, it's members of the Council, it's France, European Union, together with Germany, though Germany is not a Security Council, but still has a very good impact on the international level, through maybe France. So every country comes with their agenda. They say about the human rights, but in the back they have political agenda. It's kind of hypocrisy sometimes, even when we look at the European Union, when the human rights defenders under the attack risks, they rank just one maybe say like send the information to the country, oh don't touch them, very highly. But if we see at the end, it's a game of all big powers, and sometimes we feel lost, right? We think what we're doing, we're so small for them, even they don't see us, and they do what they want in the very big scale. So that's why When I say about the fashionable, some authoritarian regimes just think, okay, we have this political agenda with them, and they keep violating rights, and they have no responsibility, no consequences at the end. Yes, all these sanctions with Russia and European Union is again political agenda. It's nothing to do with human rights. Why? It's at the end brought so many damage to the economic situation. So I don't want to go to politics at all. Politics is very kind of like debatable. We can talk whole our life, I think, about this. So, but state has never had interest, never ever. But they have interest when they see that a lot of money can come. I think it's a matter of money.
Yeah,
And
just to add from mainly from the point where you are from, when we talk about human rights, democracy, rule of law, good governance, all those nice things, we rush to blame the so-called authoritarian regimes. But I think it's time, the exact time to look inside. What are the so-called democrats contributing for the persistent existence of these regimes? And right now, maybe some of you may not agree with my proposition, but I would say that the West-East narration is getting narrower and narrower. And I don't see the West at the exact moral standard where it used to be back 10 years ago, to say, openly criticize and denounce what the already branded authoritarians are doing. If you go to my country, for example, and criticize the anti-terrorism law, the civil society proclamation, or the media and the press proclamations, they would bring to you exactly the same copy of a legislation enacted here. So that, what's the difference? We know we don't have the institutions to supervise and oversight how these very blurrily articulated provisions and exceptions, rules, principles are being practically applied. But they don't go to those details. So, are we still free to make this kind of huge difference of, and yeah, for the last 2 years we have this issue of refugees and all the other internal problems, the talk of populism and the right-wing influence. So I would encourage you guys, especially who are born here or Europeans, to concentrate on what your governments are contributing for making life to the authoritarians more luxurious. That would be the main emphasis which I would like to give.
Looks like we have time for one more question. For the last question, I'd like to kind of hear from somebody who we haven't heard from or who hasn't had a chance to ask a question yet. I saw this hand up first. Could you stand up, give your name and where you're from?
we can maybe take two, yeah?
Oh, we have 10 minutes left, so we'll go.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll make it short.
Yeah, we would like.
Okay,
That's great.
thank you very much. My name is Giacomo, and I'm from Germany, and I actually have two short questions. They are hopefully really not long. The first one is concerning the moral standards of the European Union and the development assistance which is connected with it. In last years, we saw that China followed a very different approach for development assistance, while granting the host countries more of political participation and more freedom of how to actually handle the investment. Would you say that China did it right when you compare it to the European Union? Do you think that the European Union development assistance could maybe learn something from the Chinese way? Or how do you see its recent development? The second question is concerning the human rights defenders action plan that you are pursuing. Are you also working together with Amnesty International on this issue? Because as far as I know, next year Amnesty International is going to launch a big campaign which is actually only focused on the expanding human rights defenders globally. And I think this is a really interesting issue because Amnesty International is a big organization that has a very big supporter basis, and maybe this could be something we could collaborate or we could also catch on just foster your ideas.
Okay, let me just say a few things about the first question, the role of China in influencing the West-East narration and comparison of what the European Union or each member states individually are contributing towards it. There is no doubt what China's priority is in developing countries. Pure investment with no, or I don't know if there is little even, I cannot say that even, concern to the issue of human rights, because the system in China itself would tell. But for how long are we going to externalize the problem to China and other hegemonic powers like Russia? To what extent are we immune from the problem itself? Because once we talk about these very sensitive current issues, it doesn't matter who is there on the table, we tend to agree. The rationale behind or the purpose or the motive might not be the same. But we are always there giving legitimacy and recognition to those who are every day normalizing the issue of perpetrations as a practice of ruling or as a system or a norm of ruling. So I still insist that China's role and all other authoritarian hegemonic powers' contribution towards that end is not disputable, but still that in and of itself cannot be a consideration to externalize the problems. We have to start by admitting that the West, that we have this proud of being a mosaic of nations who are guardians to democratic values, human rights, rule of law, good governance, and popular governance. All these kind of concepts, they are claimed to have been emanating from the civilized culture of Europe. So do we still represent them? Not only what we are having here inside, but its repercussional effect towards the other side of the globe. That would be the main takeout.
And short answer to your short second question. Amnesty International, Amnesty International is a very, very big organization, and it's usually also, all the time, I today talked a lot about that, we have a lot of questions, right? And one of the questions also was, what is the difference between Human Rights Matter and Amnesty International? I think no difference, because we have the same vision, we have the same our long-term goals are pretty the same. We want everyone to be happy in this world, and dignity and rights be respected and protected. Human Rights Matter tries really hard to be engaged in all kind of activities going on in the globally. It's not Amnesty International only the only organization who works with human rights defenders, it's the frontline defenders, it's a Freedom House, it's many now organization networks, big networks. It's a shelter program in the Netherlands. So the human rights defender situation deteriorated, I would say, since maybe 5 years ago, it became worse and worse and worse. So that's why it's now an agenda of the human rights in general. So we are trying to be part of any campaign wherever it's possible. But we all the time have to bear in mind that it's a matter of resources, it's a matter of time, it's a matter of management. It's not just that it is an agenda. But we all the time happy as much as we have the possibilities to be a part of campaign, to be a part of the network, and it's not just also members of the 20 networks. It's about qualitative work. It's not the quantitative work. Oh, we're part of that or network. No, we would like to be in one network, but we would like to be effective on that, and not to jump into everything where the grants or money is I would just very, very, very shortly, if it's may allow, to say that our organization, we are purely self-funded organization. We are trying now to raise the funds in order to make this sustainable, some of our programs. But Shimels, me, Linda, and all our members, we have a little bit job outside where we earn there. We bring to the organization. We pay our rent from our own pocket. So whatever the water we buy for the organization, starting from water, and go into the rental space, we do ourselves. So that's why we were working over the past 4 years. We were pro bono work, only pro bono work. So that's why it's quite challenging sometimes. Unfortunately, we need sometimes financial in order to travel somewhere to see with our eyes what's going on. Because here something, it's like 100 times here, it's better one time to see. This kind of quotation I translated literally. So, but we do our best. We do our best to be part of the campaign. Yeah. And maybe last question, or
the final question is actually a speaker from yesterday who talked about social and economic rights and for
Oh,
Yeah, that would be good.
Lobbying is to be sort of a major task of human rights defense. And it could be like either politicized or either criminalized. And in order to become one of change political changes in this sense, the good way should be to make spread out the idea we have to be a popular mandate. So popular mandate could be transformed into a legal. Do you agree with what are your thoughts on that?
I'm not quite sure if I understood what you reflect.
The best way to overcome the politicizing or criminalizing of the local would be like being positive to the popular mandate of the population. So that could be changed to legal change of political change. So as the lobbying can be equated to the popular mandate. It's a foundational point of view.
Yeah. I have to say that I agree. Basically, we know every legal matter comes from the policy, and all policies are at least in presumption expected to be reflections of the interests of the public. And who owns really affects whether what you do is legitimate or illegitimate. So creating a positive image to the very general public of the work that you're doing would also influence the outcome of what you're saying about or what you're doing, or what you are doing. So that's why Farangis was talking that it's not just a work that very few people can own and handle everything by their own, but irrespective of our professional background, our cultural or whatsoever differences we have, as long as we own it, simply by the mere fact that we are human beings, then it becomes a subject of not a very few people, but a subject of everybody. So that, outsourcing the idea so that it can be owned by as many as possible people would also affect how we disseminate and how we influence and the actual result of our work. So you're right in that sense.
Okay, let's